All right, welcome to BenThere, episode 29. Thank you for watching, no matter where you're watching from. This is BenThere, episode 29, with Mr. John Voigtmann as our guest. This is a show about people and their stories, specifically people that have grown up outside their passport country. This is going to be a treat. My guest today has done that and is continuing to do that. So I can't wait to talk to him. But just know that this, like I said, this is a show about people first and foremost, but specifically this season anyway, it's about people that grew up outside their passport country. John Voigtmann, you're still doing it, man. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get into everything, but I want to first off thank you.
Pleasure.
Welcome to the show, buddy. So how you doing?
Great. It's great to be here. I appreciate it for giving me this chance to tell my story.
Absolutely, man. How are things in Italy right now?
Well, I think this is such a crazy year. I think, when you were asking me, how's everything going? I always want to say, great. It's my first reaction, but I don't think anybody is really great these days, that's for sure. So,
No.
But we're trying to stay positive, and we're trying to do what we can to get through this time right now.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Let me give the viewers a little bit of background. First off, if you're watching from Facebook or if you're watching from YouTube specifically, I got to give a little plug to the BenThere show. Make sure you go ahead and follow us and subscribe to us. This is going to be a good one. But yeah, John and I, we didn't know each other well. You were a couple of years older than I, but you and I both have that connection of being TAS graduates, and we're going to get into that in just a little bit. Sure. Randy Chen's already chiming in, buddy. I don't know if you can see down below. There you go. You need a haircut.
Oh my God, do I ever?
Yeah. Good.
Just about they're probably going to close hairdressers again, so I better get in before we go down to our next lockdown.
No, appreciate it. Thanks for Randy told me he was going to be sleeping during this, so he must have gotten up early. So, well, listen. Usually, John, the first question to this is basically pretty simple. Just summarizing. I know you. You a couple of years apart, TAS, but growing up the way we did. If you could just kind of tell the viewers your upbringing, where you were born, where your family's originally from, and then how you initially ended up overseas. If you don't mind doing that, we'll get started that way, and then we'll get into everything, man. So
sure, my pleasure. Listen, I'm American. Obviously, my parents are American, and I spent most of my childhood in Taipei. My father was in the military, in the U.S. military originally, and he's a lawyer. And was a lawyer and an investigator for the military during the military time of the military presence in Taiwan. I think it all started really probably as a result of the Vietnam War. My father was getting out of law school in Indiana, and when it was trying, like everybody really at that time, to sort of figure out what to do with his life in the context of Vietnam War. And he had the bright idea to get himself enrolled in Chinese language school in the military because, he grew up in the Midwest. This is the late 60s, and he thought, what's the one thing that no one's ever going to have to care about so that I could just be left alone? And he thought that was studying the Chinese language. He was on the wrong side of history when it came to that. And so he ended up being a very important Chinese scholar for the military. And I think that after a few years, it became clear that he had chosen the wrong language. It was one that was going to be at the center of American foreign policy going forward. So he was stationed several times in Taiwan during the military presence there. And after the military left, we moved back to Washington, D.C., where I was born, actually, and spent a few years of childhood there, but really with no memories. And he moved back, having Chinese and having relationships with the military. He moved back as a member of as an officer in the reserves and started his own business in Taipei as a lawyer and as a kind of a business consultant. And that was the early 80s, for 1981 probably. And I was there through graduating from high school in 91. So my father developed a business there, and my mother was involved in a social welfare organization that she set up to help women in crisis and babies with severe disabilities, which she just recently retired from after 30 years. So I wasn't necessarily.
So they're still in. I don't mean to interrupt you. They're still in Taipei. Oh, wow.
They've just
Okay.
left. They've just left this year. In fact, my dad just retired and my mother just retired over the last couple of years, and they're now living in the U.S. where my brother and sister live. But I wasn't the typical kind of international kid in the sense of being, being part of a kind of a corporate family or really a military family. I mean, those are really the two ways that people can sort of end up overseas. When your father or your mother is an executive for a U.S. company and gets stationed abroad, you might end up moving around quite a bit. A couple of years here and a couple of years there, and as you know, a lot of our friends and classmates from TAS would be there for a few years and then move on.
Yeah.
That was the experience of most of my friends, and I think most third culture kids have that experience as well. That a lot of friendships become extended even more globally, because people are moving around, and that's true for places which have military presence. Obviously, people would be there for 3 or 4 years, or diplomatic presence, be there for 3 or 4 years and move on to another country. So I was one of those who went to Taipei and never really moved. So it wasn't that my parents moved around. They became the old hands of Taipei, and so I was there. My younger sister went K through 12 at TAS, and I was there from 3rd grade on, so never really moved, and was really fixed there. And like I said, my parents just retired and just left Taiwan now, so they were there for quite a long time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you and I are similar that way because my brother and I had parents. My dad was self-employed. We were in Hong Kong prior to Taipei. He was with McDonald's Corporation, and then he did the same kind of. He was a consultant. He was all that, but that's what when we were in Taipei, he was self-employed, and then they ended up in Singapore for many, many years. So I get it. I totally understand that. So
you and I
were with the. Go ahead.
Like I said, a lot of our friends ended up in almost everybody I know from TAS also lived in Singapore and Japan, or eventually in China or other parts of Europe. And so they really had a kind of more of a global sort of upbringing. Whereas even though I was in Taipei, I wouldn't say I had a global upbringing. In many ways, it was quite provincial because I was just there. And even though contact from people all over the world, but I had a pretty narrow view of the globe being just in Taipei. A unique view, but a pretty narrow one anyway.
Yeah, you and I both, man. I totally understand that. So no, I appreciate that. Well, look, I looked at your bio. Obviously, you've lived in so many places. You've lived in the U.S. You've lived in Asia, obviously. And it sounds like you lived in Europe even before Italy. You were in Europe.
Sure. Yeah.
So I got to ask you the ultimate question of us TCKs, man. Where is home for you?
It's a really good question. And that's really the question. And I think it's, for me, I don't really see it as one place. I see it as different stages of my life and different parts of me. And I think when you get to, if you've lived in a bunch of places, you get to a certain stage in life where you kind of look at them and have a chance to choose where you want to be. Taipei will always be my childhood to me. It will always be something very important, and I have wonderful memories of it. Also, Chinese culture in general is something I've always been passionate about and always very fond of, especially traditional Chinese culture, let's say. And then, in many ways, New York is home for me, being American, even though I never really lived there before going to university. But it's where I went to university. It's where I had my first job, my first career was there. And it's a place that I kind of grew up. I think we grew up several times. You grew up once as a kid. You grew up once as a young adult. You can grow up again as an adult. And I think I've had 3 or 4 times growing up. So, but I really, coming of age in New York City was something that is a big part of who I am, and relationships and friendships and things like that. So I would say that New York is part home to me. But if I had to choose, I'm in Europe and I'm living here. And although I'll never be Italian for many reasons, but Europe really is a place where I would, if I had to, close my eyes and choose, I think I'm here for a reason now. So, this is my 3rd time growing up. Would be here in Italy, and this is where I am now.
I love that answer because you and I both, man. It's just I have no business being 44, but that's what the documents say. But yeah, growing up, right? Growing up is that's a great answer to the question.
I'm not done.
So
I'm not done growing up.
Yeah, right. Totally. So yeah, so much to talk about. I can't wait to get into all the details. Before we do that, though, look at Randy's little comment there. He said you got to ask John how he got McDonald's before he came to Taiwan.
Oh my goodness! McDonald's is still close to my heart as well, even though now my career revolves around healthy and local food production. But when I was a kid, and I think when you define yourself as when you're living abroad in another country, some of those small aspects of quote unquote home or your home culture become really kind of tender to you. And when I was very young, there was no McDonald's in Taipei. And
what year did you move there?
We moved in 81. Yeah. And I think the first McDonald's came in like 83 or 84.
Yeah. Yeah. Because we moved there in 86, and my dad had been going there back and forth for, I think, since 84, so to speak. So, yeah.
So I'll tell you a story about how much those things mean to you. Is that my father used to go to Hong Kong quite a bit for business as well. And he used to bring me McDonald's back from Hong Kong, like on the plane, carry on. And I would eat it like 6 hours later, like a pig in shit, right? So happy about it. And he tells a story. One time he's on the plane coming back. He would often go in the morning and come back in the evening, or just stay one day or whatever. But it was an evening flight. He was coming back at the end of the day, and he's got McDonald's in his bag, right? This is the early 80s in Asia. And he sits down. There's another American executive sitting down next to him on the plane. And the guy's like, are those McDonald's French fries in your bag? And my dad's like, yeah, And the guy's like, why are you going to eat it? And the guy said, no, I'm taking it home to my kid. And the guy's like, you're taking McDonald's to another country for your kid? He's like, well, they don't have it in Taipei, and he's really fond of it. And the guy's like, oh, that's nice. like 15 minutes later, the guy's like, you sure you don't want to just like crack open those French fries right now? And my dad's like, no, I get it. It's pretty tempting. That smell is something else, but it's for my kid. Half an hour later, the guy's like, I'll pay you $100 for those French fries. Right?
Really?
And my dad's like, come on, man, it's for my kid. It's like, you gotta be so desperate. Luckily,
That's
it's
awesome.
only like a 45-minute flight. But my dad, he never told me whether he gave a couple of French fries. I didn't count the quantity in that. So he may have sold off a few chips along the way. But
that's okay. Go ahead. I was just gonna say my dad would have been proud. He was known as the fry guy in Asia, period. So he was, even after he left McDonald's, he was known as the fry guy. He helped. He was a consultant. Yeah, he was a consultant to Simplot, who here in the States makes the fries and they go global. Okay. But he was he would put on showcases of how to cut the fries properly, cook the fries properly. He was known as the fry guy in Asia, so he would have been proud of that story. So I appreciate that.
Well, I have a restaurant here in Tuscany, which is obviously a famous culinary destination, and we have an amazing local ingredients that we work with, and we obviously have a long cuisine tradition to work with here. It's there's a lot of very traditional and a long history of these great dishes, and we serve some of those, and we kind of experiment a little bit with the recipes and also the ingredients themselves. We try to freshen up to have a more modern take on it. But one thing that we do here is we have a hamburger with French fries on the menu. They have a kind of a special beef here called Chianina beef, which is raised from a certain race of cattle that's prized here, and they eat it with the bistecca fiorentina and tartare. So we do a beef fillet with it. We do a tartare with it, but we also do a hamburger and French fries. And I tell people sometimes that I really only opened a restaurant here in Italy just for the opportunity to have a burger once in a while. So,
that's awesome.
These things run deep.
I love it, man. That's a great answer. I love that. So my dad would have been proud. He unfortunately passed 2011, but he'd be proud to know that you're doing that. So
great.
Let's move on. Thanks for the honesty, man. I appreciate that. Positives and negatives. Let's talk about your overseas experience growing up, specifically internationally, being a third culture kid. Because I never even heard the term until about 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when I started doing some research on this and whatnot. But let's talk about your personal international experience growing up the way you did. You and I are both Taipei American School graduates. That's our connection. But how was it for you? Let's talk positives. Let's talk negatives, because there's both, right? So go ahead and answer that. So.
Well, I think, I had a very, it's a very specific experience going to an international school with with tons of different nationalities all around you, and you have a certain type of childhood and high school experience, let's say. And when you move beyond that, I would say one of the negatives is that it's really hard to explain that. It's really hard to explain who you are. It's really hard to find your footing when you're kind of going through the college phase and that early adulthood phase, when there's sort of a track for other people, for also positives and negatives involved in that. But when I moved from Taipei to New York City to go to school at Columbia, I found it, which is also a global place full of different ethnicities, but I found it really difficult to sort of try to explain who I was, not just explain literally, but also just to fit in myself. It was a small community, and it was a unique experience, and other people don't necessarily get that, and not that they were mean or judgmental or anything about it. It's just like you don't fit in. You're not an American and you're not Chinese. And I think that the negative part of the third culture kids is that you're neither. That's the whole point of the third culture kids. So it's not like I could go and hang out with the Taiwanese and feel perfectly at home. It's not like I could go and hang out with the Americans and feel perfectly at home. I always felt special and really proud of it, but at the same time, it's a hard process to integrate yourself into the bigger world that way. So I would say that is the classic negative, for lack of a better word, side of the story, is that, and then when you find somebody who grew up in an international school, even if it was in Saudi Arabia or Africa or Europe, you immediately had a connection with them because they kind of understood that type of environment. But that was pretty hard, even in a place like New York City, where again, it wasn't like I was going where everybody was white and everybody was the same. It was incredibly diverse.
See, I did that. I went that route. Yeah. So, but we'll talk about that later. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know. Maybe then you would be able to define. I was just another peg in a really broad, diverse palette there. And it was really hard to find my place, I would say, coming out of it. Obviously the positives are so many, in terms of a richness, in terms of a tolerance, I think, in terms of a natural acceptance of diversity rather than kind of knowing enforced or forced form of open-mindedness. There is no other way, and kind of racism and intolerance is just simply impossible in that environment. It's not that it was banned or not that it was frowned upon. There's no oxygen for it in that environment, at least in the context of where I was and where we were. So, I think that looking back on it, that's a pretty extraordinary gift that I was given. Also, everything I've ever done in my life has involved people from other countries, involved a certain amount of diplomacy. And that served me in my academic life. It served me in my first career incredibly well. It was the basis of my music career, music business career. And it's, what I do now. I welcome people in my hospitality career from all over the world, and it comes naturally to me. And it's a skill of mine and a gift of mine. And it was really nurtured by the international environment in which I grew up.
Yeah, I love that. I love the comes naturally thing is you and I both totally agree on that. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. What advice would you give then to families that are currently living overseas or, struggling, whatnot, finding out they're maybe moving overseas today? Because it's still happening, COVID and whatnot, but people are finding out. What kind of advice would you give to those families?
Well, to see it as a gift and as an opportunity, and at the same time be really realistic about the homesick aspect. That also feeling out of place in a third culture is very normal. It takes a lot of time, and you could be moving to Tuscany or moving to Paris, and everyone is going to say, "Oh, well, that sounds so amazing." But it also comes with a lot of challenges, especially if you come from a really grounded environment in your own life. But I would say that it is a gift. The world is a global place, whether you experience it or not. And I think the world has changed a lot in our lifetimes, that it's certainly much more global than it was in the 80s when I was first going there. So I think the world is a global place, and it's better to participate in it rather than being provincial. And you can be provincial and misguided and ignorant in almost any place in the world. So, the more you travel, the more you see these other cultures. It is a gift. But at the same time, the advice I would give is to go easy on yourself, because it takes time to feel comfortable wherever you are. But even if you're at home, it's not like everybody is the same. Wherever you grew up, it's not as it was when you were a kid anyway. Whether you grew up in a small town, it's probably more global now than it was 30 years ago. So, everywhere is a global community, and see it as a gift to be in one that is richer and more diverse.
Absolutely. No, I love that. I love that answer. I got to just ask you this. When's the last time you were back in Taipei?
Gosh, it's been a while, because my parents had a house in Hawaii for a while, in Honolulu, which served as kind of a meeting point. My brother's in California. My sister lives in Las Vegas. And they both have big families. They both have family. My brother has a big family, and my sister has a child. And so it was a nice meeting place from between California and Taiwan for them. Of course, for me, everywhere was a long way to get to. But we always kind of had our family time in Hawaii. So it has been at least 5 or 6 years since I've been back to Taipei, which is a shame, because I miss Randy, and I miss who's still holding down the fort there.
Yes.
And I miss I miss the freaking dumplings. So
the night market, right? Just the food down there. All that stuff. No, I appreciate that. I want to quickly just I'm sure you can see this, but a lot of people are chiming in right now. Kate Driscoll, I don't know if you remember her.
Sure.
But yeah, she's saying hi. So just want to give a quick little shout out to Kate. So look,
awesome.
So much I can relate to. Everything you've said, I couldn't agree more. I want to dive a little bit deeper into. Hold on a second. My buddy Tim Wanger is chiming in, and the Bang Bang candy bars. There you go. There you go.
The flute cookies. Those little wafer chocolate.
Yeah, totally. Look, I want to. You briefly mentioned it, but I want to talk about acclimation stateside from college. You went to Columbia, which is impressive enough, right? So I want to. Look, I've said this many times on the show. I don't know how many of these of you watched, but acclimating back to the States, that was such a wild experience for me. I came back to a small town in North Carolina, played baseball. On my little bio for baseball, it talked about being from Asia, all that stuff, and yet obviously I don't look the part, right? So it's I struggled. I was 6'2", white guy, baseball player, played college baseball. It was great. And yet I never truly felt accepted, right? So that was my own personal experience, and that was kind of my introduction. Whether the term TCK was around or not at that point or not, it was something I struggled with intrinsically. That was probably the hardest part about acclimating back to the States. Did you experience any of that at Columbia? I mean, you were back in the States, New York, obviously a metropolitan area, obviously a pretty diverse group of people. But how was your experience? If you don't mind going into depth on that, how was your experience? Because you were raised in Taipei, basically.
Sure.
And like I was, I was in Hong Kong for 3 years. My brother and I were in Hong Kong for 3 years. And then Taipei, I was in Taipei for 7. So, excuse me, total of 7 or 10 years. I always thought of myself as American, and then I go back to the States, and I felt so awkward being home, right? So what was your, if you don't mind diving, a little deeper into your acclimation process, it's all you, man.
Well, I'll say just first that there were a lot of times I wished I was a 6'2" baseball player. I think maybe that would have helped. I was a 5'8" poetry lover, really into classical music, so that only goes so far. Listen, New York City is an animal in and of itself, and so I think we couldn't have had different acclimation landscapes as we came back. New York isn't America. It's not America. It's its own sort of crazy animal. So I think everybody coming from anywhere is going to have an acclimation situation when they get to New York City, especially Columbia, and especially in the early '90s, New York City wasn't the sort of friendly place that it is today. It was a little bit rougher around the edges. I was there for the tail end of a crack and violence epidemic.
Yeah, my brother can vouch for that. He went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, so he can totally vouch for that. So go ahead.
Absolutely. Shout out to Jason. And again, Pratt is located, in the early '90s, where Pratt was located is not how it is today. So it is really, it was a lot more rough around the edges, and Columbia was as well, up on the edge of Harlem there. So it was, it was kind of a shock to, like anybody, no matter where I was from, even if I was from from North Carolina, going to New York City, there'd be a shock coming. And I felt that because, again, Taipei and our community and the international school and the international community there and the international church community that my family was heavily involved in was a pretty tight community, and a tight and nurturing and gentle community. And I got thrown into kind of the deep end on the upper end of Manhattan there. And so that was challenging in that sense. Adding on top of that, I didn't really know if I was American, what that meant, and what I wanted, as anybody at the early college years are trying to figure out what they want to do with themselves. So, and Columbia certainly wasn't a nurturing environment. It's a great school. Okay. Yeah, it's an excellent education. Academically, it was everything I wanted it to be, but they didn't actually fucking care about you. So sorry, I shouldn't.
No, you're fine. You can do whatever you want, brother. It's all free speaking, so to speak.
Good. Yeah. I'm sometimes used to giving sort of interviews with travel journalists and stuff, and
bring it. You can curse, you can swear, you can drink, whatever works, man.
I'm also sitting in the kind of library lounge in my hotel here, and
I wondered about that. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So
we'll talk about we're going to talk about La Bandita in just a little bit, but go ahead.
Anyway, so just to continue, I think it goes back to the fact that you can't hang out with the Asian kids, and you're struggling to sort of fit in with the American kids or the white kids or the black kids or whatever you are. And again, I was never treated badly, but it was just a natural. So that was pretty tough coming back to New York City. And at the same time, I was studying Chinese, and I didn't really know for what reason I was studying Chinese. And I was, so, all of the same things that go into people in their sort of confused college years. So I was studying Chinese, and then after 2 years, I picked up and I moved to Cambridge in the UK, where I went into a completely different place, which was, a completely rural environment where I had to, ride a bike to across the farmland in order to get to my lectures and things like that. And along a river, and it looked like it was the 17th century. So
let me ask you. I'm gonna cut you off real quick. Did you feel more at home in Cambridge than you did at Columbia?
Absolutely not. I mean, obviously, Cambridge was full of really well-meaning and kind old British family kids, right? So I went from super cool hipster kids in New York City, from super sweet Asian kids in Taipei, to like these old British families kids who like to play darts and eat dinner at 5:00. So again, I went from one environment to another one where I didn't really fit in. But by the time I was in my early 20s, I was like, that's cool, man. I'm not fitting in. I'm just along for the ride. And so isn't it amazing that I get to go from, hip hop parties in New York where I don't belong, right? And then to, punting along the cam and having dinner at 5:00 and playing darts and drinking lots of beer. I'm like, I don't belong here either, but this is awesome. So I think by the time that those years came along, I was really along for the ride and learning that that special skill, which is the really, when you get to this as a third culture kid, where wherever you go, you're just cool. You're just all right where you are, and you're not fitting in anywhere, and you're not justifying anything. And you could throw me down in the middle of a Hindu temple, or a bunch of French intellectuals, wherever you want to throw me, or surfers in Australia, and I'm not going to be able to do any of the stuff that they do. I'm not necessarily believe what they believe. I'm not necessarily going to succeed. I'm not going to become one of them, but I'm going to feel comfortable, even if I don't look like I fit in, even if other people aren't comfortable. I'm going to be just fine. And so that's that's the goal of the third culture kid. Is like, it's not weird for me. I can walk right into any room, and I'm just going to stand there. And if it's weird to other people that I'm there, it doesn't bother me.
No, I love that. And it's funny because I asked the home question earlier, and yet the biggest thing that's always I guess come across my way is that home is, we can feel like it's anywhere and nowhere, right? We can blend in anywhere and nowhere. And I totally relate to that. So I love that answer, because I felt the same way, even in North Carolina. Like, there was so much. I went to a small school in North Carolina right away just to play baseball, and hurt my knee, blah, blah, blah. I ended up in Boise, Idaho. And the funny thing is, when I got to Idaho, when I moved in to the dorms, there was a picture, Ben Vogel, and there was a Taiwan flag, right? Because it was where your parents were based, And the irony is, I've said this a couple of times on the show, but the irony is, my roommate at the time was Chinese American, Asian American.
Oh, how funny!
Yeah, right. And so he had the American flag, right? So people like, hey, knock on the door, like, I think they got your flags backwards. And I'm like, no, actually they didn't. Trying to explain that, and yet you hit it perfectly. It's you can blend in anywhere, and yet at the same time you feel so, I don't want to say outcast, because that's the wrong word, because like you felt like you belonged, and yet you there's a tiny party that didn't really feel quite like you belonged, right?
Yeah, and when you lose that anxiety is when you know that you've kind of arrived. And again, it's not a matter of becoming the group that you are in. It's a matter of, you could participate. I mean, I can sit down with a group of Chinese and play mahjong, but I'm not trying to be them. I'm not going to be more legit than they are. And again, I could go surfing with a bunch of Australian guys. It's like, I'm not good. I'm not going to be like them. And, I'm not going to, I'm not trying to become them, and I think some people are really good at that, like becoming part of the group that they're in. And that's also a really good skill. I've developed just the ability of, like, I'm just going to be here. Right. And I'm going to have fun, and I'm along for the ride, and whatever the awesome thing about this place is, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to feel comfortable doing it. And I'm not going to try to be, I'm not going to try to fit in. Right. I'm not going to try to change who I am. I'm just going to enjoy all of these things are a part of me. I'm never going to be any of those things. And, I'm never going to be Italian, but I feel really comfortable amongst them. And almost always it's the other people that are looking at me like worried that I'm not going to fit in. Right. Or trying to compensate for me. And I'm like, I'm good. I know it looks weird, but I feel comfortable.
No, I love that answer, because I feel the exact same way. I mean, along for the ride is probably the quote of all those TCKs, right? That's kind of how I feel. And even today, that's how I feel. I live in Utah. My wife's from Utah. I'm not from Utah. And yet I'm along for the ride. As long as it fits the pattern of our lifestyle right now, it works. And we'll see what happens in a year, 2 years, 3 years. So, but I love that answer, because that's exactly how I feel. By the way, I'm taking notes. I've got my little note copies here. So if you see me looking down or writing something, that's all I'm doing. Okay. So I love that answer, man. I couldn't agree more. I think of you when I look back to the TAS days. Like I said, you were my brother's age, class of '91. Mm-hmm. You were always the, I look back now, you were always the artistic guy. You were the drama guy. You did all the plays. Did that continue on after TAS, or what was your, I guess, artistic outlet once you left TAS?
Well, the good thing about being in New York City is that it's an artistic and cultural paradise. And so, I really enjoyed participating in all forms of kind of in music and in drama and all forms of art like that. When I got to a certain age, I realized that I wasn't that actually doing it myself wasn't really what I wanted to do. And so I did a little bit of all of that in college. I played a little bit. I did some acting. I played in the orchestra at Columbia. But what I really wanted to do, and I wanted to see the people who are really great at what they do. And so the museums in New York City, the live music in New York City, and all of the art around in New York City was what I just kept kind of consuming it. And when I started working for RCA Records, it was really about a pursuit of enjoying the really best of virtuosity wherever it is, whether that's rock music or jazz or classical music or poetry or art or dance, theater. I love being around artistic people. I find artistic expression to be pretty extraordinary, and I don't really have that talent. But I do have the talent of appreciating it, and of hearing the voice that's coming out of an artistic expression is one of the things I'm pretty good at. And really my role at RCA Records was translating that into kind of a business and corporate world. So I saw my view as kind of protecting artists and helping them through navigate the world that is not art, all the business, all of the PR, all of the other kind of dirty stuff around artists to get. And I always like to think of myself as somebody that created space for artists to express themselves and let them be who they are. And I've always wanted to be close to kind of strange and extraordinary people, because I'm not really strange and extraordinary, but I love being around them. And a lot of my friends are strange and extraordinary people that I'm really blessed with. And again, I'm not trying to be them. I'm along for the ride, as you say, and as I said. And so it's always been really important to me. And people who know me know that music and art are really important things for me to consume, and also to protect and encourage and to love and to kind of express that, to the importance of having kind of art in your life, and the importance of space and time for people who are creative to be able to do the work that they do.
I love that. Great answer. Great answer. Before we go any further, though, I gotta chime in here. Look, Debbie Krieger Beaver, I should say, looking good. Charlie Brown. Looks like, and then ironically, Randy just wrote to reply to that. I gotta appreciate Randy's take on that, because just having hair, period, I'm a little bit jealous.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. As long as I've got it, I'm gonna let it go. Right?
No, that's awesome. So look, you mentioned it, you brought it up. Your post-college career, you were a music executive, right? And that's pretty admirable, and so many people want to hear about that. How did that happen? How did you get into it? How did all that start? If you don't mind, kind of just, I truly want you to brag about yourself for a minute. But like, how did that all go down? What was that about? How did you get into that? All that stuff. So.
Well, it's gosh, I have no idea how it all happened. I've also had the knack of again, I'm always standing around in the room at the right places when things happen. I was lucky enough to do an internship at RCA Records during college. The kind of thing. Being in New York City, one of the advantages is you can sort of work for kind of big important corporations and still be in school. So I did that while I was still studying, and after I was finished studying, I really wanted to stay in New York City, and so I was able to kind of finagle a job at the classical division at RCA Records. And really, in the first 6 months of we were owned by a German company, so it was owned by Bertelsmann, the media group, RCA Records, and I was working for the classical music division, which now sounds like doing manicures for dinosaurs or something. It's like I don't even know. It's like 4 outdated things ago. But it really involved the kind of international coordination because most of the classical music was done by Europeans and recorded in Europe, but sort of paid for and produced out of the United States, and most of the marketing and sales were coming out of the US. But so there was this natural need for communicating back and forth, and they were doing it really badly. And in the first 6 months of my first job, I sort of, raised my hand in a meeting and said, well, has anybody told the Germans this or asked what they think? And they go, oh, I don't know, blah, 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 blah. And I would talk to the Germans, and they would say, something or other, and I would go, have you asked the American executives this? And they would go like, well, blah, blah, blah. And I said, guys, do you mind if I talk between the two of you? And that, again, in the first year of my first job, they were like, listen, you talk to the Germans. I can't deal with them, the American executives. And the German executives basically did the same thing. So I became kind of a go-between, an ambassador between, stupid shit. Basic production details and PR details for the release marketing of albums. And I somehow became indispensable in this over the course of 3 years. And they were sending me back and forth between Europe, America, and Japan, basically because people didn't want to or feel comfortable talking to somebody from another country.
Wow.
So, I mean, how lucky could I be that that was the one thing I could do? You know what I mean?
Right place, right time, right? Yeah, right place, right time.
Single talent. Unless there was a major job out there with, English romantic poetry, this was the only other thing I could do. All right. So I got lucky in that sense. And through a couple machinations of the corporate world, I moved to the RCA sort of pop and rock music division. And on the very first day, they took me to my office and they said, and I was, the most junior marketing person in their international marketing division. And they said, listen, we just signed this new singer, and she's, we don't know what to do with her, but we want you to meet her. You are going to be helping her along as we put together this stuff. We don't really know what's going to happen. So the first day, Christina Aguilera walked into my office, sat down on my desk, staring at me, this 16, 17-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And I was like, hi, I'm John. She's like, hi, I'm Christina. I'm recording an album. And cool, I'm gonna, do you know where the bathroom is? Because I was like my first day, I was like,
yeah,
I'm like, I'm like sharpening pencils, in the machine, and she comes up. So they said, I was the youngest person there, and she was the newest signed artist. And then for people they had several other big acts going on at the same time that they were really focused on. So Christina kind of landed in my lap, and it took a while for the record to get made. So I kind of developed a relationship with her. And then obviously, what happened with Christina happened, and I was kind of standing around. She would have been a star, without me. But then when she blew up, they were like, oh yeah, who's looking after her again? Oh, John, good, great. John, go to London with her and to the MTV Music Awards and make sure she talks to the right people. I was like, what? All right. Wow. So, it all kind of exploded quickly for me. And again, my boss at the time, who was an awesome guy, was like, I don't want to go to freaking Korea with her. And I was like, I'll go to Korea with her.
Yeah, you were waving the flag. Yeah, I get that. So, I totally understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, there was a lot of that. And so I had a trial by fire by the kind of global marketing and press and PR for very famous artists. I got to see somebody kind of blow up right in front of my eyes, and I spent kind of a year and a half traveling around with her and keeping her out of trouble. And again, keeping the executives from screwing up what she had, which was this incredible talent and this incredible desire to be a big star. And I was trying to keep her from screwing up what the executives wanted to do, which was make her a big star, right? But if without somebody taking care of both sides, without somebody who could understand both the executives and the artists, you can kind of trample each other. And that happens a lot. It happens a lot in artistic worlds all over the place. It happens a lot in movies and other things like that. So that was, trial by fire. And suddenly after 2 years, Christina was this, huge star. And I was, some of that shined off on me. And I was able to develop my career with other artists, some of whom were going to be stars no matter what, and lightning was striking. And other people, there were other examples where me and some other executives really busted our ass and stuck on our necks and put our careers on the line to make sure that their album the patient didn't die on the table before we had a chance to fix everything. And so I'm proud and very honest about all of those experiences.
No, I love it. If you don't mind me saying here, but Maroon 5, Foo Fighters, and Kings of Leon, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty big names. So
again, I didn't make any of the music. I didn't find any of these people. My dog has found a squeaky
That's all right.
toy.
No, my dog usually comes in here about halfway through the interview, always. Yeah. But we're dog friendly here, so it's all good. So.
Exactly. Well, you're not squeaky toy friendly. Nobody is.
She usually barks. She barks at cars driving by, so it's all good. Yeah. Anyway, but Maroon 5, Foo Fighters, Kings of Leon. You were responsible. I guess, is that fair to say?
I mean, again, I didn't find any of these artists. I didn't make any of the music. I can't take. I didn't participate in that,
Sure.
in the creation of the music, and those guys are 100% responsible for their success, and it speaks for themselves. Maroon 5 is an example where not everybody believed in that band in the beginning. And they, both Kings of Leon and Maroon 5 were both popular outside the US before they were inside. And so my job, and as I sort of quickly moved up in the department, when Maroon 5 and the first Kings of Leon album came out, I was head of the international marketing division.
Okay.
And so it was my job to kind of plan and coordinate a global release for these things. And they weren't working in the US, and they blew up outside of the US first, which really made me look good. In fact, again, it was certainly the Kings of Leon were going to happen outside the US. They blew up in the UK, and there was nothing I could have done to screw that up. And then really, we were able to build on that momentum from the US. But in Maroon 5 was a single that was out in the US, and it was kind of hanging around, and it was called Harder to Breathe, was their first single. And it wasn't really pop, and it wasn't really rock, and it wasn't fitting into the kind of the right radio formats in the US. Adam was handsome and charismatic, but they weren't a boy band, but they weren't like a rock band either. So it was really hard to kind of find a home for them. But I really believed in them, and we were having little bits of success in Germany and Japan and Brazil, I think, with Harder to Breathe. But they had this other song called This Love, which is a song that everybody knows from Maroon 5, from their first album. And I was convinced that was a big hit. So I was just trying to buy time, and I took the band, 3 or 4 times to do some promotional events, minor TV shows, radio promotion things. You could do kind of contests, do record signings, and it was small stuff in Europe. And on the 3rd time I was taking the band over there, my boss, who was the GM of the company, was saying, this is the last time we're doing this. You know what I mean? Like, it's either now or never. And it started to work just enough. I believe it was Germany, and there was signs of hope that we actually got through to This Love. And once This Love came out, it became a huge hit on the radio all over Europe, and the US caught on eventually, thank God. And so I think, the band would certainly look back on those times. I wasn't the only one who believed in them, but certainly was pushing. Had I been more timid on the international side, the US might have just moved on to other acts. But I really demanded, as forcefully as I did anything in my career, to give Maroon 5 a little bit of more time, and give me a little bit more money to travel around with them, and more time. And eventually it all worked, and the whole US company got behind them. And then, the rest is history, as you said.
I love it.
I'm proud of that. Yeah.
As you should be, man. I mean, as you should be. Yeah. So, so you went from vice president of international marketing for Sony Music. Is that fair to say? Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I don't know how it happened, but you ended up in Italy, and you left that market and you moved to Italy, and then the Tuscan countryside. I want to hear every little detail of this, because I think I talked to you before we went live. My honeymoon was actually spent in Tuscany, so I'm so curious how you went from that market, being an executive, a record label executive, and all that stuff, to, I don't know if you were in Italy touring. I don't know what you were doing, but you obviously found the countryside of Tuscany and the restoration of an old ruined farmhouse. That's what you do now. So it's John Voigtmann Part 2, right?
Right. Yeah.
So how did you go from being a record exec to I'm in Italy. I love this countryside. I see a farmhouse that I want to restore, right? Like, how did that all go down in terms of, La Bandita? We'll talk about that in just a second. But how did that go from one thing to another? I mean, that's a pretty big get, so to speak.
Sure.
So, how did that go down?
Oh, well, again, a couple things happened that they're just sort of luck and happenstance as well. But, it also became clear in the early 2000s that the record label business was changing. And I think without the disruption of the media business with digital media distribution, with, I don't know if you remember Napster and those early days of the music swap sites, it became clear that I had worked really hard. I had built this career. I'd had all this, success as an executive. And I was coming to the realization that the product we were selling was now free everywhere. And so this is, and that there was a kind of coming crisis about the way that our business was being run, and we could see the numbers drastically declining. Before this became a mainstream issue, we could certainly see that young people's habits were changing, that people were not going to be buying CDs, and that we were not a technology company. We were very much a media company. Look how well trained my staff is. 7 o'clock. Look what arrives. Negroni, right on time here.
Hey,
Thank you, Mike.
Coffee. It's early here in the Utah, but cheers, brother.
Well,
so, yeah.
Aperitivo time in Italy stops for nothing. So my boys know that at 7 o'clock, this shows up in my hand. So anyway.
I love it. I love it. Yeah.
So I realized that my career would be changing for better or worse, and the executives were all panicking. The corporate. At that point we were bought by Sony, so very, very, very senior executives at Sony were interviewing young executives. I was in my early 30s, and I was a vice president, and I was sitting down with these very famous CEO level people who were saying, "What do you think we should do with the company?" And I'm like, "Dude, you're the one being paid $10 million a year, right? Like, if you don't know what to do with a company, I'm not going to help you, and I'm not going to help." I think I told Andrew Lack, who's a very well-known executive, "I'm not going to help you land this plane." So awesome. It had also the attacks of September 11th in New York City were really kind of traumatic for me. As they were for everybody.
Were you in New York when that happened?
I was in New York when it happened, and there were a couple of people close to me who passed away. Not close to me, but people in my life, and just I had just gotten married, and that sort of was a big kind of wake up call about what do you want to do with your life, and what are you doing with your life. And the record business was collapsing. I had just gotten married. I was traveling around the world like crazy. And I was thinking eventually, of having a relationship, of starting a family, of thinking about the future. And all those things kind of came together. It's like, I can't count on this career. And New York City was momentarily terrifying. And traveling like crazy is great in your 20s. And you could do it in your 30s. And I was thinking, I don't know if I could continue to do this in my 40s and 50s and 60s and on from there. So I was worried about the longevity and the health of myself and my career. And at that time, all of those things were coming together. I think if I had worked in movies or television, which were more equipped for lots of reasons to make this transition to the digital media world that we live in now, I'm sure I'd still be there, right? I would be longing to move to Tuscany. I would be sure that my lifestyle wasn't healthy. It would be very difficult to see my children, but I would never have left. But the fact that the record labels were just collapsing before our eyes provided me with this existential moment of, dude, your career's not going to be there. And not like in 18 years, like in 18 months. And so it forced my hand a little bit. And I was still young and ambitious and dumb enough to try to restart my life again. I had met Undine, who is my ex-wife and the mother of my son. We had met at Columbia, and she was born in Ireland and grew up in Italy. So she was also very much a third culture kid and somebody from a kind of a global upbringing.
I gotta stop you. She can't be too bad. I'm Irish by I guess DNA.
There you
so,
go.
Yeah.
There you go. She was born in Dublin. Her mother's British and her father's American, actually.
Love it. Love it.
And so she had lived in Tuscany as a child, and had these happy memories. Her father passed away when she was living here, and so she had wanted to show me Tuscany. We traveled here. We had vacationed here a couple of times. And then when we were thinking about getting married, because my family was in Taiwan, her family was in Europe, we had friends in New York, but not roots and not extended family. So it's like, where do you want to get married? Where would you do it? So it felt weird to do it in any of Taiwan or where her mother lived or where or even in New York sort of felt weird. So we decided to do it here. And in the process of coming here over multiple times, I sort of fell in love with this area, the Val d'Orcia, and these villages of Pienza and Montalcino and Montepulciano. And I was like, damn, there's nowhere to stay here. This place is awesome and there's nowhere to stay. And so this idea that, you know, a kind of underdeveloped, beautiful area that had really captured my heart coincided with the idea that my career wasn't going to be there, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to live in New York City, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to get on a plane every week, and I wanted to slow my life down a little bit. All came together with the opportunity to start a new business here, and starting a business here was very much an excuse to change my life, to get out of a big city, to not work for a big corporation. You know, I tell this story a lot that when I'm still, you know, the guys in Maroon 5 are always really great to me, and we always had a really great relationship, and I really respect them, and I'm really happy for their career. And Adam was always really great to me. Their manager was a close friend of mine, actually died. A close friend of mine during that time, and somebody that I knew afterwards. He actually passed away, I think just a year and a half ago or something. But you know, after they sold 10 million albums, they sent me a bottle of champagne. And I opened the champagne and I enjoyed the champagne, but I didn't own any part of their success, right? I had a great job. I was paid very well, but I didn't have a piece of any of what they created. And not just financially, like just in terms of ownership. So, you know, I appreciated the bottle of champagne, but you know, at the end of the day, when you work for somebody else, that's what it is. And even though I was well compensated at the time, I was like, you know, I want to do something for myself. I want to do something that that is mine, and I'll ride or die with that. So I would much rather have a small business that I know and control, and I'll go with the ups and downs, than getting a bottle of champagne for every 10 million albums that I sell. So, you know, all of those things kind of came together, and I was young, in my early 30s, and I really wanted to change my life, and having traveled my whole life, and not having really firm roots anywhere, I was looking for this kind of traditional lifestyle that they have here. It was very attractive to me, this idea of being really grounded in one place. And again, it's not what I'm doing, but I love having it around me. And I love the healthiness of the lifestyle. I love the beauty of the landscape. And the more you travel the world, the more you realize that the world is just getting fucking uglier everywhere and more the same. And I just wanted to be in a place that wasn't getting uglier, where it was impossible to build new things, where everything was protected, and a way of lifestyle that was healthier for your heart, for your soul, for your spirit, ecologically sustainable, and much closer to sort of the values that I had, and the values of corporate America, or corporate anywhere, and the values of I felt I wasn't fitting into that as much anymore. And I didn't want to get ahead. I didn't want any more money. I wanted to be happy. I wanted to feel a healthier lifestyle. I wanted to have a different place. I couldn't imagine starting a family anywhere else. So that all came together as I found you know, an opportunity to invest in a property here, and together also with Randy's help. Randy is an investor and co-owner in the business. He's watching here. So calling upon Randy understood every single word of what I said, and all the reasons why I would want to leave my job and start here. And for Randy, it was an opportunity for us to invest in something together. And while his own career was growing in his family business, it was a way to keep us together as friends, you know, give us something to have together forever. And so we went in on this, and I felt that a kind of a small, stylish place to stay would be fun, and would pay for itself, and pay for a simpler, smaller lifestyle for me here.
No, I love it. Great answer. Before we dive deep into La Bandita, I want to ask you though. I gotta ask you, because I know a lot of people are probably wondering this. Do you miss the record industry? Do you miss that whole concept of that lifestyle, that you know, that concept, so to speak?
Well, you know, yes and no. First of all, it doesn't exist anymore. So I think it's easier because the job I did, the kind of job I did, the kind of career it was, it no longer exists, right? It's It's a different world, the media business now, whether that's music or movies or television. It's a very different world. I caught the tail end of the good times, the party times, and the very unregulated corporate profligacy that we managed to do. You know, it was my job to travel around the world entertaining rock stars and spend as much money as I want. They don't really let kids.
Not a bad
do that
gig,
anymore.
by the way. Not a bad gig. Yeah.
So if there were like a bunch of kids doing that now in my absence, I might look around once in a while and be like, damn. But that specific stuff doesn't exist anymore, so it's a little bit easier to be at peace with it being gone. Okay. But you know, I don't miss anything else of it. You know, this year I think is pretty extraordinary in the sense of how much all of us miss live music, live shows, live events, and you know, and so I do miss being kind of at the center of an exciting artistic experience, things like that. But I you know, again, the world is a global place, and even living here, I go to 5 or 6 concerts a year, you know, using still friendships and relationships that I have from the music business, and I get treated very well, and I have a great time, and I can come home here. So I don't miss that. I mean, in this COVID year, we all miss it. We all miss it terribly, but you know, I don't really miss anything other than getting paid twice a week. I don't really know.
Yeah, I get that.
I could use that.
Yeah, you and I both, right? So let's talk about that then. Let's jump right into La Bandita. So the move to Italy, Tuscan countryside, you know, the restoration of an old farmhouse. You converted a stylish, if I'm reading this right, the 12-room boutique hotel. That's what La Bandita is. But I want you to talk about La Bandita right now. You know, go ahead and plug that right real quick.
Well, it's really 2 properties. We have La Bandita Country House and La Bandita Townhouse. The country house is the original property that I started with, which is an 8-bedroom villa that we run as a kind of a stylish B&B, or as you rent the whole place for parties and events and weddings, things like that. It's not so much a hotel. It's kind of a party house, for lack of a better word. A bunch of friends take it over, and we all have a good time. And otherwise, we rent individual rooms there, and it has a chef. When we do a communal dinner every night there, you know, a set menu. Everybody eats the same thing at the same time, even when they don't know each other from different parts of the world, different countries. There are Italians and Germans and Americans. I mean, in normal years anyway, all kind of sitting around the table at the end of the day talking about, you know, what they did that day. And so it's not really a hotel. It's kind of this communal B&B when it's not a like event space. We do a lot of weddings and events there. The La Bandita Townhouse is a boutique hotel, you know, a hotel with you know, a reception and numbers on the doors and all the things that a hotel has, and a restaurant that's also open to the public. And the townhouse is in the center of a little historic village called Pienza, which is a beautiful tiny village and it's surrounded by countryside. And so, but it's quite well known to Italians, and today it was super crowded with domestic tourists. Because it's famous for being very beautiful. The area, the village was built in the Renaissance all at one time as a kind of an experiment in building an ideal city by the Pope at the time, and it's been left untouched, and so it still stands as a testament to what an ideal city is, what proportions between countryside and city, between man and nature, between you know, sky and buildings. All of those things are thoughtfully done 600 years ago and still stand as a testament to what urban life could be. So urban in quotes, because, you know, there's 800 people that live here in the village, but it's still an example of what it means to be a city in relationship to your surroundings. Anyway, so it's a way for people. There are lots of places to stay in Tuscany. There's some really beautiful hotels. They're usually in the countryside, outside of the villages, and usually you're there with other tourists. So it's hard to get into a place that feels authentic and untouched by really the tourism. And our place here in the center of the village gives you an opportunity to live in a village for a few days, which doesn't have other big hotels, and where you can kind of see daily village life going on around you, and you realize that, oh, there are real people here. Like, oh, this is what Italians do all day. Like, this is, so you don't really see that in Rome or Florence or Venice, which are cities first of all, but also very touristy. So getting a glimpse of kind of a daily life of Italians is something really sweet and underappreciated, and that's really what the kind of the product that we do. And then the restaurant is open to everybody. It serves, tourists and domestic tourists, Italian travelers, and also people from the village when they want, a special evening out.
I love that. I think you and I talked about this before we went live, but yeah, my wife and I actually honeymooned in Tuscany.
Yeah.
We were a little further away from you. We were at Montecatini. Is that did I say that right? Yeah. So we spent most of our time there, but I love the area, and I can totally see why you chose that area, right? So it's
gorgeous.
It's amazing. Yeah. Well, let's go right into it. Then you're also a consultant with the Vines of Mendoza, right?
Yes.
The wine country, so to speak. So how did that all go down? 2014. It sounds like you branched out and you started kind of dipping your head into the wine industry. So how did that all go down?
Yeah. Well, also, when you create a small business and you create a small brand, for lack of a better word, and whatever industry you're in, I think. And what's extraordinary about the world today is that there are a lot of barriers to discovery that have come down in the world that we live in now, in this sort of digital, internet connected world. So even though I really thought I was making a small business in the middle of nowhere, and I would be forgotten, and that was okay with me, but it turns out that this globalized world kind of interconnects in a way that. Even though our business is very small and our hotel is very small, like people from all over the world come here, and I see some friends who live in London and New York as much as I saw them when I lived in London and New York. So people travel a lot, and you get just this interconnected world. So when you create a successful brand, other people appreciate it, and that could be a huge brand, and you could make billions of dollars out of it, or it can be a small brand that people appreciate, like what we have. I think people come here and recognize that what we've achieved is something really special. And people have periodically ask me to help them caretake the birth of their own businesses in other places. And I've acted as a kind of a hospitality consultant, even though I never thought of myself as a hotel expert. But people like to bring me in because I'm not a hotel expert, and I have a certain atmosphere and style of relaxed informality, of kind of warm professionalism, but disarming without being too formal, with having fun while you work, and a kind of stylish mix of old and new styles in terms of design. So people have asked my help in creating some other resorts. And now the Vines of Mendoza is actually a resort in Mendoza in Argentina. And funnily enough, the guy who owns and started it is an American who left Washington, D.C., sick of politics that he worked in, around the same time that I got sick of the music business and left and came here. So he moved to Argentina, and he started a business around the same time. So we've had these kind of parallel lives. And we found each other through mutual friends, and I went to see him in Mendoza when he was getting his business up and running. And what he does is a private winemaking club, for lack of a better term. And so he sells small tracts of land to people who want to make their own wine without buying their own winery. So he has a winery cantina, a winemaker, a enologist, all of the background stuff to making a wine that is shared for the individuals who own small plots of land, who then decide what grapes to plant, how they want to farm, and work with a winemaker there on the style of what wine they want to make. But they don't have to own the whole winery themselves. So they make small batch private wines using the shared services of the cantina. And I helped him a little bit when he was setting up the resort that they built around that. But at the same time, I kept telling him, if you can do that in Argentina, you can do it in more famous wine regions around the world. So together, he and I have started Vines, the Vines, which is a kind of a global winemaking program where people can buy into winemaking regions around the world and make a different wine from a different place each year if they want to, in famous wine regions here in Tuscany, but also in the Moselle in Germany, in Priorat in Spain, in Napa Valley and in Oregon. So we've built together a kind of a network of partners who are very, very famous producers in their area, and our members can can buy the right to make wine with this famous winemaker. So they have a private personal wine for themselves that was made by a famous winemaker in a famous wine region. So, and in the process of this, people get to travel around to the wine making regions, and it's my job to make sure they have a good time when they travel, more or less, in a nutshell. So I help to plan the events and activities that are not really available, no matter how much money you have. These are winemakers who don't do this, who don't meet with people, who are not open to the public, and we can have winemaking and food and culinary and cultural experiences that are not normally available to travelers, even very high-end ones, unless you know the right people. So I've helped him create this kind of global club for that. So, I came here thinking I would be forgotten, thinking I would have a quiet life, and I just can't help myself. Sometimes I just get involved in all sorts of shit. So, and when you're here, people come to you. When you're in a place long enough and you create a special brand, people come to you. Celebrities come to me here asking where to get gelato. They're like, oh, I hear you. They rent a house somewhere in Tuscany, and then they find out that there's a guy there who knows the best, whatever it is that they want. So when you're in a place long enough and you create a name for yourself, people come to you.
I love that. I gotta ask though, like how has COVID affected business and life in Italy?
Well, yeah, I mean it's been a nightmare, of course, here, and we lived through the early, at least for the outside of China, the first real problems were here. We went through a very long lockdown here, and obviously it's been devastating for my business and my employees and for my suppliers. So we were happy to get our life back in June. In May and June, when we were able to reopen, and certainly Italy had a severe medical crisis and a hospital crisis here, and it was a real human tragedy here. The stuff that we were worried about happening again, and the stuff that is happening around the world happened here first in Italy. But they were, once after getting caught unawares and not really knowing what to do about it, they really recovered and got the situation under control pretty quickly. And now we're seeing everywhere again, all the countries around us with much higher contagion rates as you go into the fall. Everybody knows what's going on in the news. So again, Italy is worried about having a second health crisis, and so they're sort of slowly putting on more and more restrictions as we go in. As we face the winter here. So far, it's not this. I mean, even though the numbers are very high, there's not nearly the number of deaths and not nearly the number of the hospitalizations that we saw earlier in the year. So we're hoping to avoid that, but because nobody wants to see that again, certainly. But it's a matter of we've all seen the economic cost, the human cost to this disease, both in the disease part of it, but also in the economic damage part of it. So yeah, I mean, I run a business that revolves around global travel, that revolves around people wanting to spend their leisure money, and the ability to get around the world effortlessly and quickly and safely. And so this is a fundamental threat. So it's a difficult time. It's certainly a very hard time for the hospitality industry and the restaurant business. But again, this is first and foremost a human tragedy, and it's a tragedy for people who are vulnerable. It's a tragedy for people who are elderly. And in Italy, that's a very big deal, because we have a large elderly population that is still living with their families and active in life. And that's the sign of a very healthy society, but it's also they're vulnerable. So we're all trying to protect the vulnerable parts of our society, and we're all willing to make sacrifices. We just don't know how much we can sacrifice. We don't know what the right thing to do is. And from a business point of view, you just don't know what the rules are going to be in the future, which makes running a business really, really hard. So we, like everybody else, we've all gone through the same process. We're hopeful that we can, somehow get through this. And I don't know what the world's going to look like next year. No one does. And so it's a moment of intense anxiety and fear and worry, I suppose. But I'm still confident that people are going to want this type of experience when we're able to travel again, when we will feel safe to travel again. And we certainly hope that comes soon.
Totally. How accepted are you as an American investor in Italy? I mean, are you pretty much welcome with open arms? How does that go down?
Yeah, I've never really felt any resistance being a foreigner here.
Mhm.
Obviously, they thought I was totally crazy moving from New York here. I mean,
Yeah.
the Italians are like, okay, dude, what you're nuts, right? Because they're all like,
Yeah.
well, we want to go to New York, and I'm like, great, we'll change. We can keep a
Yeah.
global balance.
Yeah.
So I think they've always been really welcoming to me, really kind to me. Again, they always thought my choices were crazy, um, but the town has been very helpful to me in the development. And personally, I found a community of people that have accepted that I want to be here, and so I've never felt any resistance to that. Italy's not an easy place to do business, whether you're American or
Uh,
Italian.
do you
That's
speak the
for
language?
sure.
I'm assuming you speak the language,
Sure,
right?
yeah,
You
yeah. I mean,
fluent?
you have to. I mean, if you
Okay.
ask me, yes. If you ask my employees, they would laugh. But yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, that with all you've done though, I mean, you've done a whole lot of stuff, obviously. But what do you still yearn to do? Is there
Hmm.
something John Voigtman wise, like what is he still after? Like there's got to be a finish line, so to speak. Like what are you
Yeah.
still looking to do?
I think I love I love being here. I love what I
Mhm.
do. I think the finish line would certainly have this all being a happy and sustainable business without me.
Mhm.
Without being dependent on my personality or my presence or my efforts. And I've come a long way over the last few years in developing the staff and growing their relationships with our guests and our clients. I think I'm in terms of like ambition and wanting to achieve things, I've been slowly letting all of that stuff go over the last, years of my life. I feel pretty good. I want all this to be sustainable. I want my employees to, develop and feel ownership over the business. And I'm happy to be here. I want the world just to fucking stop trying to kill itself, right?
Yeah.
And leave me
Yeah.
alone, and that would make me happy. I don't see achieving things and wanting more things as anything that's like really part of my goals. My goals are, the education and development of my son, and the sustainability of my business, and still playing a role in this community. That's all I've wanted for a long time. And the
Yeah.
world has conspired between one crisis after another to make my life fucking complicated.
Yeah.
So
All right. Yeah. Totally. What do you think the role of growing up overseas played in your accomplishments and lifestyles? Is up
yeah.
to this point at least? Yeah. What do you
Well, I
talk
mean, I
about that?
think, as I said, I think it helped me, skills as a diplomat and as an ambassador,
Hmm.
for lack of a better word. I've always been comfortable in between different people, different points of view, different ethnicities, and I'm always comfortable in that environment. And I'm happy to talk to both sides. And so I was just a natural diplomat. And so there aren't a lot of people who are comfortable really talking to people from all over the world, and that's my gift.
Yeah.
And I do it without guise, right? Without trying to get anything out of anybody. I'm just a natural diplomat, and I think that really comes out of the international community of our upbringing.
No, I agree with that because I feel the exact same way. Even though I'm stateside,
Yeah,
but I do
yeah,
feel more comfortable within the international community, even here in
yeah,
Utah. So I
yeah,
totally relate to that. You mentioned your son.
yeah.
What about his international experience? Is it similar to yours, or does he view himself more Italian or American? Like, what's his experience
And
in
that's a good
comparison to
question.
yours? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly doesn't look Italian,
Mhm.
and he doesn't. There are many aspects of him that are not, and I think that he sort of naturally feels very comfortable here, but also feels that he's special. And I think that
Mhm.
that's and people are very treat him that way. They're
Mhm.
very kind, they're very welcoming, they're very inclusive, but they also are very clear that he's different and a foreigner. And so I think he's embraced both aspects of that, and I think will continue to be. And again, even though we're in a small town that is very, very, very homogeneous, he has the whole world coming through. You know, living in a famous tourist destination, you have the whole world coming through. So he has a chance to experience a lot of people, and both from his mother's life and my life that are very international as well.
Does he go to international school, or what's his?
No, he goes to an Italian school. There's only one school here.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen when he gets a little bit older. There are some international schools, you know, in Rome and Florence, but for the moment, you know, he's fine happy in the Italian school. He speaks Italian much better than I do.
I was just going to ask you that. Like, what's his linguistic side? He's English, Italian, anything else, or is it...
Yeah, he just speaks English. He speaks English obviously natively, but every once in a while, it's kind of a funny accent. And
you
know.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome. What about your other passions, man? Like anything else passion wise? I mean, you've obviously done the music thing. You've done the, you know, the hotel thing, all that stuff. What about passions that you still have in you intrinsically? Like what do you have?
You know, I'm passionate about food and wine. I mean, that's, you know, really what I do here. And again, I'm passionate about, you know, giving space to farmers and winemakers for them to create extraordinary things. I don't really need to do it myself, but I love being around them, and I love, you know, chefs are artists. I can tell you, I got one downstairs right now, and let me tell you. So it's exactly like dealing with a rock star, exactly. And he's amazing in the kitchen, and he's probably watching. He'll watch this later. He's amazing in the kitchen, not amazing outside the kitchen, very much. All right. And it's like they're an artist, and I keep telling him, it's like I'll take care of that stuff, right? And so give these space. And I have partners with winemakers who are great at making wine and not great at very much else. And so my role is I'm passionate about giving a you know, space and a platform for people who can create extraordinary things that are good for the world, you know, that are sustainable, that are healthy, that are economically sustainable, culturally sustainable, ecologically sustainable. And are delicious and good for you. And it's great news, man. So I'm just trying to, you know, I'm passionate about those things. I'm passionate about trying to preserve a little bit of the way of life that I've also contaminated by my presence here, and by the people that I bring here. And wherever I go, I bring a globalized wave, right? And not just me, but people like me. So I want to be sure I'm treading as carefully as possible, and cleaning up as well as I can by this globalized wave that my generation has created anyway, and that globalized people like me have created in our wake. And certainly here, traditional culture around the world, whether it's Chinese or Tuscan, is very delicate, and I work in tourism. Whose job is to sort of view it. You're coming here to see it, but you contaminate it by your presence no matter what. And something I think about a lot, and I know a lot of people do too, about how to be sure that we're leaving this town better for, and this village and this culture and this area better for our presence. And so, you know, the town was here before I came, and I want it to be here after I go, and I want that to be the same with our guests. So, you know, I'm passionate about giving, you know, experiencing the cultural specialness of this area and the traditional way of life, and things that are good for both us, our mouth, our bellies, and the planet. They're not mutually exclusive. Traditional culture, even Chinese had taught us that, you know, that stuff was all sustainable, and it's probably the best stuff.
No, totally. It's funny you say that, because I look back, you know, I mentioned this earlier, but, you know, Dad's been gone a few years, but he was always that guy. He was always, look, you leave it better than you found it, you know, and I love that concept of that. So, well,
I'm
look,
sorry,
buddy,
my dog is barking at everybody, and I'm worried that my phone is going to run out of batteries any second.
Oh,
my dog.
Well, the good news is we have about 3 questions left, and these are the last couple of questions, so we're good. We'll rush right through these. These are always every guest that's been on here has had to answer these. These are the fun questions. You know, we've you know, dived deep into, you know, your music background, your Italy background, everything. These are the fun ones. So these are the ones that don't take a lot of brain power here. So
sure.
What is something most people don't know about John Voigtmann?
You know, I don't think people. I'm really good at taking naps. I'm big into napping.
Okay, good.
I'm a big
good
napping guy. Afternoon nap, man.
I love it.
I live by it.
Is that?
Yeah.
Have you always been that way, or is that an Italian thing?
Kind of always been that way, even before.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I love that. Okay, let's get to the second one then. This is a little bit deeper, but it's still on that fun side here. But if you could have a chat with anyone for an hour, sit back down on a park bench, have a glass of wine, whatever you want to do, who would that person be and why?
I thought about this when you sent it to me. I tried to come up with something clever. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure Obama is the guy, but
Yeah.
It's sort of a cop-out answer. I understand, but he would. He loves sports. He loves music. He went to Columbia, and
He was a TCK.
He grew up outside the U.S. I think he would definitely be my choice.
Okay, no, that's a good answer. I'm not going to argue with that at all. Well, look. We've made it, brother. Last question then. With all the traveling you've done, I mean, obviously you traveled as a minor, you traveled as an adult, you've been all over the world. Yeah. Is there still a place you'd like to get to, and you still have that travel itch, or what's that?
Sure. Yeah. No, for sure. I do love traveling. And I've been lucky enough to travel quite a bit all over the world and see many places. In terms of where I haven't gone that I would still like to go, or place that I would like to kind of end up. What's the question? I've never been to India. I think that's it's not some place I want to end up, but it's definitely a place that I would like to go to. So that would definitely be kind of on the next list.
Do you make it back stateside at all, or what's the?
Yeah, I mean, normally I do, but this year,
aside from right now, obviously, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Normally, I get it. I get a good dose of New York and LA each year, and also there's a travel show in Miami which I get to once a year. So I spend more time in Miami than I would like to, but I do get a chance to get to Las Vegas and LA to see my family and all my friends in New York, and work brings me to those places, 4 or 5 times a year in normal years. And I have to say, it's been almost a year since I've been back, and it's definitely a weird feeling. And I miss seeing my folks and my family. And this is just one of those crazy years. So I hope to get back there soon.
Awesome. Well, listen, if you ever end up in Vegas, you're not that far from me, so let me know.
Right.
Let me know when you're around. So, like I said, I'm not from Utah, but this is kind of home for right now, so to speak.
No one's from Utah, so that's okay.
Yeah, totally. Listen. I can't thank you enough for doing this, man. Yeah. It's been a treat, and I do appreciate your time. I respect your time too. I know it's getting late. Well, not super late in Tuscany, but I love it. I love it there.
Thank you.
Exactly. Listen, this has been a treat, and those of you that are watching, John, stick around real quick because I'm gonna chat with you after we cancel this here. But those of you that are watching, thank you so much. Just make sure if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe for us. John's dog even is telling you that. So no, appreciate that. Yeah, no, it's good, man. But thank you all. Thank you, John, for doing this. And we're gonna do one more of these, and then we're good for season 1. We've done 30 of these, John, believe it or not. Wow. So you are 29. I've got one more next week. But it's wild. This has been a ride. This was something that was initially just supposed to be, John, I told you this, something just fun, a COVID break, so to speak. But we've done. By the time we get done next week, we will have done 30 of these, and it's just been a wild ride. So yeah, almost 20. I think I told you this too. 27,000 views between Facebook and YouTube. So keep watching, keep doing this, and then we're gonna take we'll do this next week. Then we're gonna take a couple weeks off, and then we'll come right back at season 2. So John, Thank you, brother. I appreciate that. So thank you for doing this. Stick around. But those of you that are watching, thank you so much for watching. And we'll talk to you next week. Erin, I know her as Erin McKenney. She's someone that this is crazy to even think of because I moved to Hong Kong. My brother and I and my family moved to Hong Kong in 1983. So we're pushing almost 40 years of knowing the next guest. But listen, just keep doing what you're doing in Italy. Be safe, brother. And thank you for doing this. I appreciate it.
Awesome.
We'll talk to you later. All right.
Cheers.
Those of you that are watching, thank you so much. We will see you next week.